The entire county gathered at the fence line like vultures circling a carcass. 6 massive water buffalo stood in the muddy paddock, their dark shapes hulking against the grey February sky. Sheriff Tom Briggs shook his head slowly. "That woman just destroyed her son's future," someone whispered. But Evelyn Mercer didn't flinch. She stood alone at the gate, dirt under her fingernails, exhaustion carved into her face, staring at the animals that would either save her family or bury them completely. This is her story. Stay until the end. Hit like and comment your city so I can see how far this journey travels. The morning Robert Mercer died, the thermometer outside the kitchen window read -8 degrees. Evelyn found him face down in the snow between the barn and the equipment shed. His thermos lay 3 feet away, coffee frozen solid inside it. The coroner said his heart gave out instantly, probably didn't feel a thing. Evelyn nodded politely while the man talked, but she wasn't listening anymore. She was watching Noah through the kitchen window, 17 years old, standing motionless in the driveway like someone had yanked the ground out from under him. The funeral happened on a Thursday. Half of Blackstone County showed up, which didn't surprise Evelyn. Small towns always turn death into theater. People brought casseroles and sympathy cards and long, searching looks that made her skin crawl. Robert's father, Thomas Mercer, stood near the grave in his wool coat, his face carved from stone. He didn't cry. Thomas never cried. He just stared at the casket like he was trying to bore a hole through the wood with his eyes alone. After everyone left, Evelyn sat at the kitchen table with a stack of unpaid bills and a calculator that kept spitting out numbers she didn't want to see. The farm owed money everywhere. Seed suppliers, equipment loans, the feed mill, the bank. Robert had been juggling debts for years, always one season away from breaking even, always convinced next year would be different. Next year wasn't coming for Robert anymore. Noah appeared in the doorway, his shoulders hunched, his hands shoved deep in his coat pockets. "Mom." "Yeah." "People are saying we should sell." Evelyn didn't look up. People always have opinions about things that aren't theirs. Thomas called earlier. He said he could help us find a buyer, someone who'd take the whole property, pay off the debts, leave us with something to start over. Thomas can mind his own business. Noah shifted his weight. "What are we supposed to do then?" Evelyn finally met his eyes. "I don't know yet." That was the truth. She didn't know. But she knew selling wasn't the answer. Selling meant disappearing. It meant admitting Robert had failed, that the 20 years they'd spent breaking their backs on this land had amounted to nothing. It meant walking away from the only home Noah had ever known. She wasn't ready for that. Not yet. 2 weeks after the funeral, Evelyn drove to the county extension office and sat across from a tired-looking man named Dennis Kowalski, who smelled like cigarettes and burnt coffee. He listened while she explained the farm's situation, the debts, the equipment breaking down, the fields that barely produced enough to cover costs. "You're not the first widow to sit in that chair," Dennis said, leaning back. "And I'll tell you what I tell everyone. Farming's a tough business even when you've got help. Doing it alone? That's a different animal entirely." "I'm not asking for permission," Evelyn said. "I'm asking for advice." Dennis studied her for a long moment. "You want my advice? Sell the land. Take whatever you can get and start fresh somewhere else. Find work in town. Let the boy finish school without worrying about keeping a farm alive." Evelyn didn't move. "What if I told you I wanted to do something different?" "Different how?" "Something nobody else around here is doing." Dennis scratched his jaw. "Like what?" Evelyn hesitated. The idea had been forming in her head for days, half memory and half desperation, something she hadn't let herself say out loud yet. "Buffalo mozzarella." Dennis blinked. "Come again?" "Water buffalo for cheese production." He stared at her like she'd just started speaking a foreign language. You mean, like, the animal? Yes. You want to raise water buffalo in Ohio? Yes. Dennis let out a long, slow breath and rubbed his face with both hands. Mrs. Mercer, I don't even know where to start with this. Then don't start, Evelyn said quietly. Just tell me if it's possible. Possible? Dennis shook his head. I mean, technically, sure. People raise all kinds of livestock, but water buffalo? For cheese? I've never heard of anyone doing that in this state. Hell, I've never heard of anyone doing it anywhere in the Midwest. That's exactly why it might work. Dennis leaned forward, his expression shifting from confusion to something closer to concern. Mrs. Mercer, I appreciate that you're trying to think outside the box here, but this isn't a small decision. Water buffalo are expensive, the equipment alone would cost a fortune, and who's going to buy the cheese? You'd be gambling everything on a product nobody around here has even heard of. I know. Do you? Dennis's voice softened, 'cause from where I'm sitting, this sounds like grief talking, and I get it, I really do. Losing your husband, trying to hold things together for your son, but taking a risk this big right now, that's not strategy, that's panic. Evelyn stood up. Thank you for your time. Mrs. Mercer, I said thank you. She walked out before he could say anything else. That night, Evelyn sat alone in the kitchen with a shoebox full of old letters. They were from her grandmother, Lucia, who had died when Evelyn was 12. Most of them were written in Italian, which Evelyn barely understood, but a few were in broken English, and those were the ones she read over and over again. In one letter, Lucia described making mozzarella di bufala in a tiny village outside Naples. She wrote about the richness of the milk, the way the cheese stretched and folded under her hands, the taste that couldn't be replicated with anything else. Evelyn remembered visiting her grandmother's kitchen as a little girl, watching those gnarled hands pull curds from boiling water, shaping them into smooth, glossy balls that tasted like nothing she'd ever had since. Hidden in the back of the pantry, wrapped in an old dish towel, was the wooden cheese mold Lucia had carried with her from Italy. Evelyn pulled it out and set it on the table, running her fingers over the worn surface. She didn't know if this idea was brilliant or insane. Maybe it was both. But she knew one thing for certain. She couldn't save the farm by doing what every other struggling farm in the county was already doing. Corn and soybeans weren't going to pay off Robert's debts. Beef cattle weren't going to put Noah through college. She needed something no one else had. Something rare. Something people would pay for. The next morning, Evelyn called a livestock broker in Pennsylvania named Marcus Tully, who specialized in exotic animals. She'd found his name in a farm journal buried in Robert's office. Marcus sounded skeptical when she explained what she wanted, but he didn't hang up. Water buffalo aren't cheap, he said, and they're not easy to handle if you don't know what you're doing. How much? Marcus named a figure that made Evelyn's stomach drop. For how many? 6. That's the minimum I'd recommend if you're serious about production. Evelyn did the math in her head. She'd have to sell the back 40 acres. The only part of the property that wasn't mortgaged. It would leave them with barely enough land to sustain the herd. No room for error and no safety net. I'll call you back, she said. Mrs. Mercer, can I give you some advice? Go ahead. Make sure you know what you're getting into. Water buffalo are smart animals. They're stubborn as hell, and if you don't respect them, they'll make your life miserable. This isn't like raising dairy cows. I understand. Do you? Marcus's voice was kind but firm. Because I've seen people try this before. It's romantic until it isn't. And when it stops being romantic, it gets expensive real fast. I appreciate the warning. Just think about it, Marcus said. That's all I'm asking. Evelyn didn't tell Noah about the buffalo right away. She spent 3 days sitting with the decision, turning it over in her mind, looking for reasons to walk away from it. The smart move was to sell the land, take the cash, and start over somewhere smaller. The safe move was to let Thomas Mercer step in and handle everything. But Evelyn had spent her entire marriage watching Robert make safe decisions, and every single one of them had failed. On the 4th day, she called Marcus back. "I want them," she said. "You're sure?" "I'm sure." Marcus was quiet for a moment. "All right, I'll make the arrangements. But Mrs. Mercer, don't take this the wrong way. You're going to need help. Water buffalo aren't something you just figure out as you go." "I'll manage." "I hope so," Marcus said. "For your sake." Evelyn listed the back 40 acres with a realtor in town, a sharp-eyed woman named Karen Bellamy, who didn't ask too many questions. The land sold faster than Evelyn expected. Some developer from Columbus who wanted to build vacation cabins. The money went straight into escrow earmarked for the buffalo purchase. When Thomas Mercer found out, he showed up at the farmhouse unannounced. Evelyn was in the barn when she heard his truck pull into the driveway. She didn't stop working. She kept mucking out stalls, her boots squelching in the mud, her breath misting in the cold air. Thomas appeared in the doorway, his coat buttoned to the collar, his face hard. "We need to talk." Evelyn leaned on the pitchfork. "About what?" "About the fact that you just sold half this farm to buy animals nobody around here has ever seen." 40 acres isn't half the farm. It's the only part that wasn't drowning in debt, Thomas snapped. "Robert spent 20 years building this place and you're tearing it apart in a month." Evelyn straightened. "Robert spent 20 years keeping this place barely alive, and now he's gone, and I'm the one who has to figure out what comes next." "So you buy buffalo?" Thomas's voice rose. "What the hell is that supposed to accomplish?" "It's supposed to give us a chance." "A chance at what? Bankruptcy? Public humiliation?" Evelyn's jaw tightened. "I'm not asking for your approval, Thomas." "You should be," he said coldly, "because when this falls apart, and it will fall apart, people are going to remember that you had every opportunity to do the smart thing, and you chose this instead. Then let them remember that." Thomas stared at her, his hands clenched at his sides. "You're gambling with my grandson's future." "I'm fighting for it," Evelyn shot back, "which is more than you ever did for your son." The words landed like a slap. Thomas's face went white, and for a moment Evelyn thought he might actually hit her. But he didn't. He just turned and walked back to his truck, slamming the door hard enough to rattle the windows. Evelyn watched him drive away, her heart pounding, her hands shaking. She just burned the last bridge she had. Noah found out about the buffalo the same way everyone else in Blackstone County did, through gossip. He came home from school, pale and tight-lipped, dropping his backpack on the kitchen floor. "Is it true?" Evelyn was at the stove, stirring a pot of soup. "Is what true?" "The buffalo?" She turned off the burner. "Yes." Noah stared at her. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because I knew you'd react like this." "Like what?" "Like I just set the house on fire." Noah's voice cracked. "You sold part of the farm, Mom. You sold it without even talking to me." "This is still my farm, Noah." "It's my future," he shouted. "And you're throwing it away on some crazy idea that nobody thinks will work." Evelyn crossed her arms. "Then nobody has any imagination." "That's not an answer." "It's the only answer I have right now." Noah turned away, his fists clenched. "Everyone at school is talking about it. They think you've lost your mind." "Do you?" He didn't respond. Evelyn stepped closer. "Look at me." Noah kept his back turned. "Noah, look at me." He finally turned around, and Evelyn saw the fear in his eyes. The same fear she'd been carrying for weeks. The the terror that they were going to lose everything and there was nothing either of them could do to stop it. "I know you're scared," Evelyn said quietly. "I'm scared too. But if we keep doing what your father did, we'll end up exactly where he ended up. Broke, buried, gone. I can't let that happen." "So you're betting everything on buffalo cheese?" "I'm betting everything on us," Evelyn said. "On the chance that maybe, just maybe, we can build something nobody else has. Something that lasts." Noah's shoulders sagged. "What if it doesn't work?" "Then we'll fail," Evelyn said. "But at least we'll fail trying." The buffalo arrived on a frozen morning in late February. Marcus Tully pulled up in a livestock trailer that looked like it had survived a war. Behind him, a second truck carried feed, equipment, and a stack of instruction manuals Evelyn would spend the next month trying to decipher. A small crowd had gathered at the property line, neighbors, farmers, people who'd driven out from town just to watch the spectacle. Sheriff Tom Briggs stood near his cruiser, arms crossed, shaking his head slowly. Marcus climbed out of the truck, his breath misting in the cold air. "You ready for this?" Evelyn nodded. "All right then." Marcus walked to the back of the trailer and unlatched the gate. The first buffalo stepped out slowly, its massive head swinging left and right, its dark eyes taking in the unfamiliar surroundings. It was bigger than Evelyn had imagined, easily 1,000 pounds, maybe more. Its coat was black and shaggy, its horns curving back like something from another century. One by one, the other 5 followed. The crowd went silent. Evelyn heard someone whisper, "She's insane." Another voice, "That boy's gonna lose everything." Sheriff Briggs muttered something under his breath and walked back to his cruiser. But Evelyn didn't move. She stood at the gate, watching the buffalo file into the paddock, their hooves sinking into the cold mud. They moved cautiously, heads low, sniffing the air, adjusting to the strange new place they'd been brought to. Noah stood beside her, his face pale, his hands shoved deep in his coat pockets. "Mom," he whispered, "I see them. They're huge. I know." One of the buffalo turned and looked directly at Evelyn. For a moment, their eyes met, and Evelyn felt something shift inside her. Not confidence exactly, but something close. A recognition, a challenge. Marcus appeared at her side. "They'll need a few days to settle in. Don't push them too hard at first." "I won't." "You got someone who can help you with the milking?" Evelyn shook her head. Marcus frowned. "Mrs. Mercer, I'm not kidding when I say these animals are different. They're not going to just stand there and let you hook up a machine. You need someone who knows what they're doing." "I'll figure it out," Marcus sighed. "I hope you're right." He left an hour later, and the crowd slowly dispersed, leaving Evelyn and Noah alone with 6 water buffalo and a future that suddenly felt a lot more fragile than it had that morning. Noah turned to her. "Now what?" Evelyn looked at the animals, at the barn that needed repairs, at the fields that stretched out cold and empty under the February sky. "Now we work," she said. The first week was chaos. The buffalo refused to go into the barn. They crowded in the paddock, suspicious of the structure, unwilling to be herded. Evelyn spent hours coaxing them, bribing them with feed, trying to earn their trust. 2 of them were aggressive, charging the fence whenever she got too close. Another one was skittish, bolting at the slightest sound. Noah helped when he wasn't in school, but he was terrified of the animals, and they seemed to sense it. Every time he approached, they shifted away, their dark eyes watching him like predators sizing up prey. Feed was another problem. The local suppliers refused to deliver once they found out what the feed was for. Evelyn had to drive 2 counties over to find someone willing to work with her, and even then, the prices were higher than she'd budgeted for. The barn needed work too, reinforced gates, better ventilation, a milking station that didn't exist yet. Evelyn hired a contractor from town, but he quit after 3 days, spooked by the buffalo and unwilling to deal with the gossip that came with the job. And through it all, the county watched. People drove by slowly, staring at the paddock like it was a car accident they couldn't look away from. At the diner, conversations stopped when Evelyn walked in. At the feed store, clerks avoided eye contact. Even the mailman started leaving packages at the end of the driveway instead of bringing them to the house. Evelyn felt the isolation closing in, but she didn't let it stop her. Every morning she was up before dawn, feeding the buffalo, checking their health, making notes in a worn notebook. Every night she collapsed into bed, too exhausted to think, her body aching, her hands blistered and raw. And every single day she thought about the cheese, the mozzarella she hadn't made yet, the product that didn't exist, the dream she'd bet everything on. 3 weeks after the buffalo arrived, Evelyn received a letter from Italy. It was from a man named Vittorio Bellini, an aging cheesemaker in a small town outside Naples. Evelyn had written to him weeks earlier after finding his name in one of Lucia's old letters. She hadn't expected a response, but Vittorio had written back. His English was broken but readable. He explained that he'd known Lucia years ago, that they'd grown up in the same village, that he remembered her well. He was sorry to hear she had passed. And yes, he would be willing to teach Evelyn how to make mozzarella di bufala, but it wouldn't be easy. The milk is different, Vittorio wrote. The process is different. You must learn to feel the cheese, not force it. Many people try, most fail. Evelyn read the letter 3 times, then folded it carefully and tucked it into her pocket. She didn't care if most people failed. She wasn't most people. The first attempt at making cheese happened on a Sunday morning in early March. Evelyn set up a makeshift workstation in the kitchen. Pots, thermometers, cheesecloth, rennet she'd ordered from a specialty supplier. She'd read Vittorio's instructions a dozen times, memorizing every step, every temperature, every detail. Noah watched from the doorway, skeptical but curious. "You really think this is going to work?" he asked. "I don't know," Evelyn said honestly, "but I'm going to find out." She heated the buffalo milk slowly, watching the thermometer, adding rennet at exactly the right moment. The curds began to form, clumping together in the whey, and for a brief moment Evelyn felt a flicker of hope. Then everything fell apart. The curds collapsed. The texture turned grainy and wrong. When she tried to stretch the cheese, it broke apart in her hands, rubbery and useless. Evelyn stared at the mess in the pot, her chest tight. Noah didn't say anything. She tried again the next day, and the day after that, and the day after that. Every batch failed. The cheese wouldn't hold. The texture was wrong. The flavor was off. Evelyn's hands were burned red from the boiling water, her patience fraying with every ruined batch. But she didn't stop, 'cause stopping meant admitting defeat. And Evelyn Mercer wasn't ready to do that, not yet. By mid-March, the pressure from the county began to escalate. A new livestock ordinance appeared on the town council's agenda. Vaguely worded, but clearly aimed at Evelyn's operation. It required special permits for non-traditional livestock, with fees high enough to crush any small operation. Sheriff Briggs showed up at the farm with a clipboard and an apologetic expression. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Mercer. It's not personal." "It's always personal," Evelyn said flatly. Thomas Mercer hired a lawyer and filed a claim against the farm, citing old debts and unpaid loans that predated Robert's death. He argued that Evelyn was mismanaging the property and that Noah's financial future was at risk. The rumors grew darker too. People whispered that the widow had lost her mind, that she was unstable, that someone needed to step in before she destroyed what was left of the Mercer family legacy. Evelyn felt the walls closing in, but she kept working. Every morning, every night, feeding the buffalo, fixing the barn, trying to make cheese that wouldn't fall apart in her hands. And slowly, so slowly she almost didn't notice, the buffalo began to trust her. They stopped charging the fence when she approached. They let her move among them without bolting. One of the older females even started following Evelyn around the paddock, curious and calm. Noah noticed it too. "They like you," he said one evening, watching from the fence. "They're starting to," Evelyn agreed. "Why?" Evelyn thought about it. "Because I don't try to control them, I just show up every day. They know I'm not going anywhere." Noah was quiet for a long moment. Then he climbed over the fence and walked into the paddock. Evelyn's breath caught. "Noah, I'm fine," he said quietly. He stood still, letting the buffalo come to him. One of the younger males approached cautiously, sniffing the air. Noah didn't move. He just waited. The buffalo stepped closer and closer, and then it nudged Noah's shoulder gently, almost playfully. Noah laughed, a sound Evelyn hadn't heard in months. She smiled, something breaking open in her chest. Maybe they were going to be okay. Maybe. That night, a storm rolled in. Thunder shook the farmhouse. Lightning split the sky in jagged white lines. The wind howled through the trees, rattling the barn doors, sending debris skittering across the driveway. Evelyn was in bed when she heard the first crash. She bolted upright, heart pounding, and ran to the window. In the paddock, the buffalo were panicking. They charged the fence, their massive bodies slamming into the posts. One of them broke through, disappearing into the darkness. Another kicked at the barn door, splintering the wood. Evelyn didn't think. She just ran. She grabbed her coat and boots and sprinted outside into the storm, rain lashing her face, wind tearing at her clothes. "Noah!" she shouted. "Stay inside!" She reached the paddock and saw the chaos up close, buffalo scattering in every direction, their eyes wild with fear, their bellows barely audible over the thunder. Evelyn moved among them, her voice steady, her hands raised. "Easy, easy, you're okay." One of the larger males charged towards her, and Evelyn held her ground, refusing to flinch. "Easy," she said again, softer this time. The buffalo stopped 3 feet away, breathing hard, its eyes locked on hers. Evelyn took a step forward, then another. She reached out slowly and placed her hand on the animal's massive head. "You're okay," she whispered. "I'm here." The buffalo shuddered, then slowly calmed. One by one, Evelyn moved through the herd, touching them, talking to them, bringing them back from the edge of panic. It took hours. By the time the storm passed, Evelyn was soaked to the bone, exhausted, barely able to stand. But the buffalo were calm again, huddled together in the barn, safe. Noah appeared in the doorway, his face pale. "Mom?" Evelyn turned. "You stayed out there the whole time." "I had to." Noah stared at her, something shifting in his expression, fear giving way to understanding. "You're not scared of them," he said quietly. Evelyn shook her head. "No. They could have killed you. But they didn't." Noah swallowed hard. "Because they trust you." "Yes." He looked at the buffalo, then back at his mother. "I'm sorry I doubted you." Evelyn's throat tightened. "You don't have to apologize." "Yeah," Noah said. "I do." He walked over and hugged her, and Evelyn held him tight, rain dripping from her coat, exhaustion weighing down every bone in her body. But in that moment, standing in the barn with her son and 6 water buffalo and a future that still terrified her, Evelyn Mercer felt something she hadn't felt in months. Hope. The morning after the storm, Evelyn woke to find 3 of the fence posts snapped clean through. The paddock gate hung at an angle, one hinge torn completely off. Mud covered everything. The driveway, the barn floor, the buffalo themselves. She stood in the doorway with her coffee, surveying the damage. doing calculations in her head she didn't want to finish. Noah appeared beside her, already dressed. "I can skip school? Help you fix it?" "No, Mom, you're not skipping school." He started to argue, then stopped. Something in her face told him it wouldn't matter what he said. Evelyn spent the morning dragging broken wood out of the paddock and hammering together temporary repairs with materials she'd scrounged from the equipment shed. Her shoulders ached, her hands were raw, splinters buried themselves under her fingernails and she didn't bother pulling them out. By noon, Karen Bellamy's car pulled into the driveway. The realtor climbed out, picking her way carefully through the mud and heels that had no business being on a farm. She held a folder against her chest like a shield. "Mrs. Mercer." Evelyn didn't stop working. "Karen, I heard about the storm. Wanted to check on you. We're fine." Karen glanced at the broken fence, the muddy paddock, the buffalo standing in a tight cluster near the barn. "Doesn't look fine." Evelyn drove another nail into the post. "Then I guess appearances are deceiving." Karen shifted her weight. "I also wanted to talk to you about something else." If this is about selling more land, the answer's no. It's not about that. Karen opened the folder and pulled out a single sheet of paper. "The town council's moving forward with the livestock ordinance. It's going to a vote next week." Evelyn straightened, wiping sweat from her forehead. "Let me guess, they want permits. Special permits for non-traditional livestock operations, $5,000 per animal." The number hit Evelyn like a fist. $30,000. She didn't have $30,000. She barely had $3,000. "That's designed to shut me down," Evelyn said flatly. "Yes," Karen agreed. "It is." "And you're telling me this why?" Karen hesitated. "Because I don't think it's right, and because you should know what's coming." Evelyn stared at her. "You voted for this?" "I abstained." "That's the same as voting yes." Karen's jaw tightened. "I have to live in this town too, Mrs. Mercer. I can't afford to make enemies on the council." "But you can afford to watch them destroy someone's livelihood." "I'm trying to help you." "Then vote against it." "I can't." Evelyn turned back to the fence. "Then we're done here." Karen stood there for another moment, then walked back to her car without another word. Evelyn watched her drive away, her chest tight, anger burning hot under her ribs. $30,000. They might as well have asked for the moon. That evening, Evelyn sat at the kitchen table with a stack of law books she'd borrowed from the county library. She'd never studied law, she'd barely graduated high school, but she wasn't going to let ignorance be the thing that destroyed her. She read until her eyes burned, flipping through statutes and ordinances, trying to understand the language, searching for loopholes. Noah came downstairs around 9, his backpack slung over one shoulder. "You're still up?" "I'm working." "On what?" "Finding a way to fight this." Noah dropped into the chair across from her. "What if you can't?" Evelyn didn't look up. "Then I'll figure something else out." "Mom." His voice was quiet. "What if there's nothing else to figure out?" Evelyn finally met his eyes. "Then we lose." "But we don't lose because I gave up. We lose because they made it impossible. There's a difference." Noah studied her for a long moment. "You really think you can win this?" "I think I have to try." He nodded slowly, then stood and headed back upstairs. Evelyn returned to the law books, but the words started blurring together. She rubbed her eyes, poured another cup of coffee she didn't want, and kept reading. Somewhere around midnight, she found it, a state agricultural protection statute that exempted certain livestock operations from local ordinances if they met specific criteria for educational or experimental farming practices. The language was vague, but it was there. Evelyn copied the statute word for word into her notebook, her handwriting shaky from exhaustion. It wasn't much, but it was something. The town council meeting happened on a Tuesday night in the basement of the municipal building. Evelyn arrived early and sat in the back row, her notebook open on her lap, her hands folded to stop them from shaking. The room filled slowly. Farmers she recognized, business owners. Thomas Mercer walked in with his lawyer, a sharp-faced man named Gregory Holt, who looked like he'd never set foot on a farm in his life. They didn't acknowledge Evelyn. Sheriff Briggs sat near the front, arms crossed, his expression unreadable. The council president, a retired banker named Donald Marsh, called the meeting to order. He had the kind of voice that expected obedience, smooth, authoritative, condescending. First item on the agenda, Donald said. Proposed ordinance regarding non-traditional livestock operations within county limits. A murmur ran through the room. Donald continued reading the ordinance aloud, his tone suggesting the matter was already settled. When he finished, he looked up. Any public comment? Evelyn stood. Every head in the room turned. Donald frowned. Mrs. Mercer, I'd like to speak. This is a council meeting, not a public forum. The ordinance directly affects my farm, Evelyn said evenly. I have a right to comment. Donald exchanged glances with the other council members. You have 2 minutes. Evelyn walked to the front of the room, her notebook clutched in one hand. She could feel every eye on her, judging, skeptical, waiting for her to fail. She cleared her throat. This ordinance is designed to shut down my operation. Everyone in this room knows it. The permit fees are so high that no small farm could afford them. But what you might not know is that this ordinance violates state agricultural protection statutes. Donald's frown deepened. I'm sorry? Evelyn opened her notebook and read the statute aloud, her voice steady. Any livestock operation engaged in educational or experimental agricultural practices is exempt from local permit requirements. My farm qualifies under that exemption. Gregory Holt leaned forward. Mrs. Mercer, with all due respect, raising 6 water buffalo doesn't constitute an experimental agricultural practice? Yes, it does, Evelyn said. There are no other water buffalo dairy operations in the state. The entire project is experimental, and I'm documenting every aspect of it for potential educational use. That's a stretch, Gregory said. It's the law, Evelyn replied. Donald shuffled papers, clearly annoyed. Mrs. Mercer, even if what you're saying is technically true, the council has the authority to regulate livestock within county limits for public safety reasons. Then regulate based on actual safety concerns, Evelyn said, not financial barriers designed to eliminate competition. Competition? Donald's voice rose. You think anyone here sees you as competition? The room went quiet. Evelyn met his eyes. I think you see me as a problem, because I refused to disappear when you expected me to. Donald's face reddened. Your 2 minutes are up. I'm not finished. Yes, you are. Sit down, Mrs. Mercer. Evelyn didn't move. If this ordinance passes, I'll file an appeal with the State Agricultural Board, and I'll win. Because this isn't about public safety. It's about a group of men who don't like being challenged by a woman who won't do what she's told. The room erupted. Voices overlapped, some shouting support, others demanding Evelyn be removed. Donald banged his gavel repeatedly, trying to restore order. Thomas Mercer stood up. Enough. The room fell silent. Thomas walked slowly to the front, his face carved from stone. He looked at Evelyn, then at the council. I've known most of you my entire life, Thomas said quietly, and I'm ashamed of what I'm seeing here tonight. Donald blinked. Thomas? Jeez, My daughter-in-law is right, Thomas continued. This ordinance is designed to destroy her, and I'm as guilty as anyone. I've spent the last month trying to force her off that farm because I thought she was making a mistake, but the only mistake being made here is ours." Evelyn stared at him, stunned. Thomas turned to her. "My son married you because you were the strongest person he'd ever met, and I forgot that. I let grief turn me into something he would have been ashamed of." His voice broke slightly. "I'm sorry." Evelyn's throat tightened. She didn't know what to say. Thomas looked back at the council. "Vote however you want, but understand that if this ordinance passes, you're not protecting this county. You're proving that we punish people for trying something different, and that's not the place I want to live." He walked out of the room. The silence stretched. Finally, Donald cleared his throat. "We'll table this matter for further review." "Seconded," one of the other council members said quickly. The gavel came down. Evelyn walked out into the cold night air, her hands still shaking, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might crack her ribs. She'd won. For now. Thomas was waiting by his truck in the parking lot. Evelyn approached slowly, not sure what to say. "I meant what I said in there," Thomas said, without looking at her. "I know." He finally turned. "I've been trying to control this situation because I couldn't control what happened to Robert, and I took that out on you." "You were protecting Noah." "No," Thomas said. "I was protecting myself from the idea that maybe Robert's way wasn't the only way, that maybe you could succeed where he didn't." Evelyn didn't respond. Thomas rubbed his face. "I still think this buffalo idea is insane, but I also think you might be the only person stubborn enough to make it work." Evelyn smiled faintly. "That might be the nicest thing you've ever said to me. Don't get used to it." But there was no edge in his voice. They stood in the parking lot for another moment, the cold air biting through their coats. "If you need help," Thomas said finally, "ask." "I will." Thomas nodded and climbed into his truck. Evelyn watched him drive away, something loosening in her chest. She wasn't alone anymore. The next morning, Evelyn returned to the kitchen to try making cheese again. She'd been failing for weeks now, batch after batch, collapsing, turning rubbery, refusing to stretch. Her hands were scarred from burns. Her patience was threadbare. But she kept trying. This time, she moved slower. She didn't force the curds. She let the heat build gradually, watching the milk transform, trusting the process instead of fighting it. When she added the rennet, the curds formed cleanly. Evelyn's breath caught. She lifted them from the whey, her hands moving carefully, and began to stretch. The cheese held. It stretched smoothly, folding over itself, glossy and elastic. Evelyn stared at it, hardly daring to believe. Noah appeared in the doorway. "Is that—" "Yeah," Evelyn whispered. "I think it is." She shaped the mozzarella into a ball and set it in cold water to firm up. They both stood there, watching it like it might disappear if they looked away. When it was ready, Evelyn cut a small piece and handed it to Noah. He took a bite. His eyes widened. "Mom? Is it good?" "It's incredible." Evelyn tried a piece herself, and the flavor hit her immediately. Rich, creamy, unlike anything she'd tasted since childhood. It was Lucia's cheese, the cheese from her grandmother's kitchen. She'd done it. After weeks of failure, she'd finally done it. Noah laughed, and Evelyn laughed too, the sound surprising them both. For the first time in months, the future didn't feel quite so terrifying. But success brought new problems. Evelyn could make the cheese now, but she couldn't make enough of it. The buffalo were still adjusting to the milking routine. They were temperamental, refusing to cooperate some days, kicking over buckets, breaking equipment. Evelyn needed help, someone who understood large animals, someone with patience and strength. She posted a handwritten notice at the feed store. Farmhand needed, experience with livestock required, will train on specialty animals. 3 people applied. The The first was a young man, fresh out of agricultural school, who took one look at the buffalo and left without a word. The second was an older farmer who lasted 2 days before quitting, claiming the work was too dangerous. The third was a woman named Sarah Campos, 42, with forearms like steel and a face that didn't waste time on expressions. She'd worked cattle ranches in Texas before moving to Ohio to care for her aging mother. Sarah walked into the paddock without hesitation, studied the buffalo for a long moment, then turned to Evelyn. "They are scared of fast movements," Sarah said, "and they don't trust men." "How do you know?" "Because I've worked animals my whole life, and these ones are smart enough to remember being mishandled." Evelyn hired her on the spot. Sarah started the next day, and within a week she'd reorganized the entire milking operation. She moved calmly around the buffalo, never forcing them, always giving them space. Under her watch, the herd settled into a routine. Production increased. Evelyn could finally make cheese consistently, but that created another problem. She had no one to sell it to. The idea came to Evelyn while reading one of Vittorio's letters. "In Italy," he wrote, "the best cheesemakers do not chase buyers, they invite buyers to chase them." Evelyn sat with that sentence for a long time. Then she started making calls. She contacted high-end restaurants in Cincinnati, Columbus, and Cleveland. She called specialty food distributors. She wrote letters to culinary schools and gourmet markets. Most didn't respond. The ones who did were polite but skeptical. Buffalo mozzarella from Ohio. It sounded like a novelty at best, a scam at worst. Evelyn kept pushing. Finally, she sent out formal invitations for a private tasting at the farm. She didn't sugarcoat what it was. A small operation, experimental, unproven, but she promised something they'd never tasted before. She sent 20 invitations, 3 people confirmed. Noah thought it was a disaster. 3 people, Mom? That's it? 3 is enough, Evelyn said, if they're the right 3. The tasting was scheduled for a Saturday in early April. Evelyn spent the entire week preparing. She made batch after batch of mozzarella, testing flavors, perfecting the texture. She cleaned the farmhouse until it gleamed. She set up a table in the dining room with fresh bread, tomatoes, olive oil, and samples of the cheese. Sarah helped her organize the barn for tours, showing the buffalo operation in the best possible light. The morning of the tasting, Evelyn was so nervous she couldn't eat. Noah found her in the kitchen, staring at the cheese samples. "You okay?" "No." "You're going to do great." Evelyn shook her head. "I have no idea what I'm doing." "Yeah, you do," Noah said. You've been doing it for months." The first guest arrived at 11, a restaurant owner from Cincinnati named Marcus Lang. He was younger than Evelyn expected, dressed in expensive casual clothes, polite but guarded. The second was a food distributor named Elena Ortiz, sharp-eyed and skeptical, the kind of woman who'd built her business by trusting no one. The third was a food critic from New York named David Chen, flown in by a mutual contact who owed Evelyn a favor. David looked bored before he even stepped out of his car. Evelyn welcomed them with a calm she didn't feel. She led them through the barn first, explaining the buffalo operation, the challenges, the process. Marcus asked smart questions. Elena took notes. David looked unimpressed. Then they moved to the house for the tasting. Evelyn set out the samples, fresh mozzarella, still slightly warm, paired with crusty bread and ripe tomatoes. Marcus took the first bite. His expression changed immediately. He took another bite, slower this time, thoughtful. Elena tried hers next. She chewed carefully, her eyes narrowing. David cut a small piece, inspected it like he was looking for flaws, then put it in his mouth. The room went silent. David set down his fork. He looked at Evelyn. "Where did you learn to make this?" "My grandmother." Evelyn said. She was from Italy. David nodded slowly. This is the best buffalo mozzarella I've had outside of Campania. Evelyn's heart stopped. Marcus leaned forward. You're serious? Completely, David said. The texture is perfect. The flavor is clean, rich, exactly what it should be. If she can produce this consistently, she's sitting on something extraordinary. Elena set down her notebook. How much can you produce per week? Evelyn's mind raced. Right now, maybe 20 pounds, but I could scale up with the right equipment. I want exclusive distribution rights for the Midwest, Elena said immediately. Marcus shook his head. I'll pay double whatever she's offering for restaurant supply. Triple, Elena countered. Evelyn stared at them, barely able to process what was happening. David stood up. I'm going to write about this, and when I do, you're going to have more buyers than you can handle. So, my advice? Don't commit to anything until you know what you're worth. He handed her his card. Call me when you're ready to go national. After they left, Evelyn sat alone in the kitchen, her hands shaking. Noah came in, his eyes wide. Did that just happen? I think so. They want to buy your cheese. Yeah, a lot of it. Evelyn started laughing, a wild, disbelieving sound that turned into something close to crying. Noah wrapped his arms around her, and she held on tight, overwhelmed by relief and terror in equal measure. They'd done it, against every odd, every doubt, every person who said it was impossible. They'd actually done it. That night, Evelyn walked out to the paddock and stood at the fence, watching the buffalo settle in for the night. Sarah appeared beside her, leaning against a post. Heard it went well. Better than well. Sarah smiled, a rare expression. Told you those animals were smart. They are. They stood in comfortable silence for a while. Finally, Sarah spoke again. You know, people are going to talk, right? About how you pulled this off. Let them talk. Some of them won't be happy. They'll say you got lucky, that it won't last. Evelyn looked at her. What do you think? Sarah considered the question. I think you're one of the most stubborn people I've ever met. And I think that's exactly why you're going to succeed. Evelyn smiled. The buffalo shifted in the barn, their dark shapes moving slowly in the shadows. Somewhere in the distance, an owl called, and for the first time since Robert died, Evelyn felt like she could breathe. The phone calls started 3 days after David Chen's article appeared in the New York Culinary magazine. Evelyn was in the barn when Noah came running out, holding the cordless phone like it might explode. There's someone from Chicago on the line. They want to order 50 pounds of mozzarella. Evelyn wiped her hands on her jeans. 50 pounds? That's what they said. She took the phone. By the time she hung up, she'd agreed to a delivery schedule she had no idea how to meet. The Chicago buyer was followed by a call from a boutique grocer in Boston, then a restaurant group in Philadelphia, then a specialty importer who wanted to discuss international distribution. Sarah looked up from the milking station. You're going to need more buffalo. Evelyn's stomach knotted. I know. And more help. I know that too. And better equipment. The setup we've got now won't scale. Evelyn sat down on a hay bale, suddenly exhausted. Success was supposed to feel different than this. Lighter. Instead, it felt like standing at the bottom of a mountain she just realized she had to climb all over again. Noah appeared in the doorway. Mom, there's another call? Someone from a Food Network show? Evelyn closed her eyes. Tell them I'll call back. They said it's time sensitive. I don't care. Tell them I'll call back. Noah hesitated, then disappeared. Sarah finished washing down the equipment and walked over. You look like you're about to throw up. I might. Because things are working? Because I have no idea what I'm doing, Evelyn said. I can barely keep up with the orders we already have. And now everyone wants more, and they want it faster, and I don't know how to give them that without everything falling apart. Sarah was quiet for a moment. You remember when those buffalo first arrived? You didn't know how to handle them either. That's different. How? Evelyn didn't have an answer. Sarah sat down beside her. You're scared you're going to fail right when it matters most. I get that. But you've been failing for months and you're still here. So maybe the question isn't whether you can do this. Maybe it's whether you're willing to let other people help you do it. Evelyn looked at her. I don't have money to hire more people. Then find people who will work for a stake in what you're building. There are plenty of folks around here who'd kill for a chance to be part of something that's actually working. You think anyone would take that deal? Sarah shrugged. You did, when you bought 6 water buffalo with money you didn't have and no idea what you were doing. You made a bet on yourself. Now you're asking other people to do the same thing. That's not crazy. That's business. Evelyn rubbed her face. When did you get so smart? I've always been smart. You just never asked. That evening, Evelyn sat down with a notebook and started making lists. She needed at least 2 more people in the barn. She needed a better refrigeration system. She needed packaging, materials, delivery logistics, a way to track inventory. The numbers added up quickly and none of them were small. She called Marcus Tully, the livestock broker in Pennsylvania. Mrs. Mercer, Marcus said warmly, I heard you're making waves. I need more buffalo. Marcus laughed. I had a feeling you'd call. How many? 4, maybe 6? That's a significant investment. I know. Can you work with me on payment terms? Marcus was quiet for a moment. I'll tell you what. You pay half up front, and we'll work out a payment plan for the rest based on your production revenue. I'm betting on you, Mrs. Mercer. Don't make me regret it. Evelyn's throat tightened. I won't. Good, I'll have them ready in 2 weeks. After she hung up, Evelyn stared at the phone, her heart pounding. She was committed now. There was no backing out, no changing her mind. She'd just bet everything on the idea that this would keep working. Noah came downstairs, his hair still wet from the shower. You okay? I just ordered more buffalo. He blinked. Seriously? 6 of them. Noah sat down across from her. Where are we going to put them? I have no idea. He laughed, nervous but genuine. This is insane. Yeah, but it's working. For now? Noah leaned back in his chair. You know what's weird? A few months ago, I thought you'd lost your mind. And now I'm starting to think you're the only person around here who knew what they were doing. Evelyn smiled faintly. I still don't know what I'm doing. I'm just doing it anyway. That's basically the same thing? No, it's not. Close enough. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, the farmhouse creaking around them, the sound of the buffalo shifting in the barn, drifting through the open window. Finally, Noah spoke again. I got my acceptance letter today, from the agricultural college. Evelyn's chest tightened. Noah, I'm going to defer for a year. No? Mom? No? Evelyn said firmly. You're not putting your life on hold for this. It's 1 year, and you need help. I'll find help. You're going to school. Noah's jaw set stubbornly. What if I don't want to? Then you're going anyway. You can't make me. Evelyn leaned forward. Noah, listen to me. I'm doing all of this so you have a future. So you don't have to spend your whole life fighting just to survive. If you stay here, you're throwing that away. Or I'm building something that actually matters. You can build something that matters after you finish school. Noah stood up, frustration written all over his face. Why can't you just let me help you? Because I love you, Evelyn said quietly, and I need you to have a life that's bigger than this farm. Noah stared at her for a long moment, then turned and walked upstairs without another word. Evelyn sat alone in the kitchen, her hands trembling. She was losing him, not to the farm, to her own stubbornness. The new buffalo arrived on a humid morning in late April. Marcus Tully pulled up with a trailer even bigger than the first one, and Sarah was already waiting in the paddock, checking fence lines and water troughs. Thomas Mercer showed up too, unannounced, wearing work gloves and an expression that said he wasn't taking no for an answer. "You're going to need help getting them settled," he said. Evelyn didn't argue. The 6 new buffalo were younger than the original herd, more skittish, less sure of themselves. They balked at the trailer ramp, their eyes rolling white with fear. Sarah moved in slowly, talking to them in a low, steady voice. "Easy now. Nobody's going to hurt you. Just take your time." One by one, they came down the ramp and into the paddock. The original herd watched from a distance, curious but wary. Marcus handed Evelyn a folder full of health records and feeding instructions. "They're good animals. Treat them right and they'll do the same for you." "I will." Marcus glanced around the farm. The new fencing, the expanded barn, the refrigeration unit Evelyn had installed last week. "You've come a long way since February. Feels like 10 years. "That's farming." Marcus tipped his hat. "Good luck, Mrs. Mercer." After he left, Evelyn stood at the fence with Thomas and Sarah, watching the buffalo adjust to each other. The new ones stayed clustered together, uncertain. The older ones kept their distance but didn't show aggression. "They'll sort it out," Sarah said. "Give them a few days." Thomas cleared his throat. "I owe you an apology." Evelyn glanced at him. "You already apologized." "Not for this." He gestured at the farm. "I didn't think you could do it. I thought you were making a mistake that would destroy everything Robert built. But you didn't destroy it. You saved it." Evelyn didn't know what to say. Thomas continued, his voice rough. "Robert was my son, and I loved him, but he wasn't a risk taker. He played it safe his whole life and it kept him stuck. You did what he never had the courage to do, and I was wrong to try and stop you." "You were scared," Evelyn said quietly. "I understand that. Scared or not, I was wrong." Thomas looked at her. "If you need anything, money, equipment, labor, you ask me. Understand?" Evelyn nodded. "I will." Thomas reached out and squeezed her shoulder briefly, then walked back to his truck. Sarah smiled. "That man's stubborn as hell, but at least he can admit when he's wrong. That's more than most people." True. They stood together in the warm morning sun, and for a moment everything felt manageable, like maybe Evelyn could actually pull this off. Then her phone rang. It was Vittorio Bellini. Evelyn hadn't heard from Vittorio in weeks. His letters had slowed and she'd assumed he was busy with his own work. But when she answered the phone, his voice sounded weak, strained. "Evelyn? Vittorio? Are you okay?" "I am old," he said, with a faint laugh. "And old men do not stay okay forever." Evelyn's stomach dropped. "What's wrong?" "My heart. The doctors say it is tired. They want me to rest, but resting is boring." He coughed, a wet, rattling sound. "I've been thinking about your farm, about the cheese you are making. It's working. Because of you." "No?" "Because of you. I only showed you the door. You walked through it yourself." Evelyn's throat tightened. "Vittorio, I would like to visit," he said. "Before I am too old to travel, I would like to see what you have built. You want to come here? If you will have me?" "Of course." "When?" "Soon. I will let you know." After he hung up, Evelyn stood in the paddock, staring at her phone. Sarah walked over. "Bad news?" "I don't know yet." Vittorio arrived 2 weeks later, smaller and frailer than Evelyn had imagined. He stepped out of the taxi with a cane in one hand and a worn leather bag in the other, his suit too big for his thin frame, but his eyes were sharp. He looked around the farm slowly, taking in the barn, the paddock, the buffalo grazing in the distance. "This," he said quietly, "is good." Evelyn felt something loosen in her chest. "You really think so?" "I know so." Vittorio smiled. "Show me everything." She took him through the entire operation. The milking station, the cheese-making setup, the refrigeration system. Vittorio asked questions, tested the equipment, tasted the milk straight from the pail. When they reached the kitchen, Evelyn made fresh mozzarella while he watched. She worked carefully, her hands moving through the process she'd practiced 1,000 times. Heating the milk, adding rennet, forming the curds, stretching the cheese until it was smooth and glossy. Vittorio said nothing. When she finished, she cut a piece and handed it to him. He took a bite, chewing slowly, his expression unreadable. Evelyn held her breath. Finally, Vittorio set down the cheese and looked at her. "You work too hard." Evelyn blinked. "What?" "You work too hard. You force the cheese. You do not trust yourself yet." "But it's good, isn't it?" "It is very good," Vittorio said. "But it could be extraordinary. You have the skill, you have the milk, but you do not have confidence." Evelyn felt her face flush. "I'm trying." "I know, but trying is not the same as believing." Vittorio reached out and took her hands, his grip surprisingly strong. "You must stop thinking of yourself as someone who is learning. You are a cheesemaker now. Act like one." Evelyn stared at him, the words sinking in slowly. Vittorio smiled. "Now, make it again. But this time, do not think, just feel." For the next 3 hours, Vittorio guided her through the process again and again. He didn't give instructions, he just watched, occasionally offering a word or a gesture, letting Evelyn find the rhythm herself. And slowly, something shifted. Evelyn stopped second-guessing every movement. She stopped checking the thermometer obsessively. She let her hands remember what her mind kept trying to control. The cheese changed, it became lighter, smoother, more alive. When she finally pulled a perfect ball of mozzarella from the water and held it up, Vittorio nodded. "There," he said softly. "Now you are ready." That evening, Evelyn invited Marcus Lang, Elena Ortiz, and David Chen back to the farm for another tasting. She also invited Thomas, Noah, Sarah, and a handful of neighbors who'd quietly supported her over the past months. She set up tables outside under string lights, laid out fresh bread and tomatoes and basil, and brought out the mozzarella she'd made that afternoon. The guests arrived slowly, filling the yard with conversation and laughter. Vittorio sat in a chair near the house, wrapped in a blanket despite the warm evening, watching everything with quiet satisfaction. When everyone had gathered, Evelyn stood up. The conversation faded. She wasn't good at speeches, she didn't have anything prepared, but she needed to say something. "A few months ago," Evelyn began, her voice unsteady, "I was standing in this yard, wondering if I'd made the biggest mistake of my life. I just bought 6 water buffalo with money I didn't have, and everyone in this county thought I'd lost my mind." A few people laughed. "Maybe I had," Evelyn continued, "but I also knew I couldn't keep doing what everyone else was doing. I had to try something different, something impossible." She looked around at the faces watching her, some skeptical, some supportive, all of them paying attention. "I couldn't have done this alone," Evelyn said. "Sarah taught me how to work with the buffalo. Thomas gave me a second chance when I didn't deserve one. Vittorio showed me how to make cheese that actually mattered. And Noah," her voice caught, "Noah believed in me even when I didn't believe in myself." Noah looked down, his face red. Evelyn cleared her throat. "So thank you, all of you, for taking a chance on something crazy." She raised her glass. "To impossible things. To impossible things," the crowd echoed. Later, after most of the guests had left, Evelyn found Vittorio sitting alone near the buffalo paddock. She sat down beside him. Thank you for coming. Thank you for letting me see this, Vittorio said. It is rare to watch someone become what they were meant to be. Evelyn smiled. I'm not sure I know what I'm meant to be yet. Yes, you do. You just do not want to admit it. Why not? Because admitting it means you cannot go back. You must keep moving forward. Evelyn was quiet for a long moment. I'm scared. Of what? That I'll fail. That this will all fall apart. Vittorio shook his head. You have already succeeded. The cheese is extraordinary. The buyers want more. The farm is growing. What more do you need? To know it's going to last. Nothing lasts, Vittorio said gently. Not cheese, not farms, not people. But that does not mean it is not worth doing. He stood up slowly, leaning heavily on his cane. I am old, Evelyn. I will not be here to see where this goes. But I do not need to be, because I already know. Know what? Vittorio smiled. That you will do something extraordinary. Not because you are perfect, but because you refuse to stop trying. He walked back toward the house, and Evelyn sat alone in the darkness, listening to the buffalo breathe. The next morning, Evelyn received a letter. It was from a culinary institute in New York City. They'd read David Chen's article and wanted to invite Evelyn to teach a workshop on American buffalo mozzarella production. Evelyn read the letter 3 times, certain she'd misunderstood. Noah found her in the kitchen, staring at the paper. What is it? They want me to teach in New York. Teach what? Cheese making. Noah's eyes widened. That's huge! That's insane! Why? Because I'm not a teacher. I'm barely a cheesemaker. Noah sat down across from her. Mom, you've been teaching people for months. Sarah, me, everyone who shows up here asking questions. You just didn't call it teaching. Evelyn looked at the letter again. I don't know. What did Vittorio say? That you need to stop thinking of yourself as someone who's learning? That's different. How? Evelyn didn't have an answer. Noah leaned forward. You're scared because this means you've actually made it. And that's scarier than failing. When did you get so smart? I've always been smart. You just never noticed. Evelyn laughed despite herself. That afternoon, she called the Culinary Institute and accepted the invitation. 2 weeks later, Vittorio returned to Pennsylvania. He was too weak to travel anymore, too tired to keep fighting. Evelyn called him every few days, and they talked about cheese, about farming, about life. On one of their last calls, Vittorio told her something she never forgot. People succeed, he said, his voice barely above a whisper, not because life becomes easier, but because they refuse to stop believing before the world finally catches up. I'll remember that, Evelyn said, her throat tight. Good, because you are going to need it. 3 days later, Vittorio Bellini died in his sleep. Evelyn sat alone in the kitchen when she got the news, the phone still in her hand, tears sliding down her face. She'd lost the man who'd believed in her when no one else would. The man who'd taught her that cheese wasn't just food, it was a way of seeing the world. Noah found her there an hour later and wrapped his arms around her without saying a word. And Evelyn held on tight, grieving for a man she'd only met once but who'd changed her life completely. The summer passed in a blur of work and growth. The farm expanded, orders increased. Evelyn hired 2 more people to help with production, both of them women from neighboring farms who were tired of struggling and ready to try something different. The buffalo herd thrived, the cheese got better, the farm started turning a real profit for the first time in years, and slowly the county stopped seeing Evelyn as a grieving widow who'd made a desperate gamble. They started seeing her as someone who'd built something real. Women began showing up at the farm asking questions, About the buffalo, about the cheese, about how to start their own businesses. Evelyn taught every single one of them, remembering what it felt like to stand completely alone. One afternoon, a woman named Claire Dennison knocked on the door. She was maybe 50, worn down by years of bad luck and harder work. "I heard you buy land sometimes," Claire said, "for expansion." "I'm not looking to buy right now." "What about partnerships?" Evelyn studied her. "What kind of partnership?" Claire explained that she had 20 acres and 3 dairy cows, but she couldn't make the numbers work anymore. She wanted to convert to buffalo dairy, but she didn't have the money or the knowledge to do it alone. "I can offer labor," Claire said, "and land if you can offer expertise and startup capital." Evelyn thought about it. "Let me talk to my people." 2 weeks later, they signed a partnership agreement. Claire's farm became the second buffalo mozzarella operation in Ohio, supplied and mentored by Evelyn's. It was the first of many. In late August, Evelyn traveled to New York City for the Culinary Institute workshop. She'd never been to New York before. The noise and crowds overwhelmed her, but when she walked into the teaching kitchen and saw the students waiting, professional chefs, food entrepreneurs, people who'd traveled from across the country to learn from her, something settled in her chest. She belonged here. For 3 days, Evelyn taught them everything Vittorio had taught her. How to feel the milk, how to trust the process, how to make cheese that mattered. On the last day, one of the students asked, "How did you know this would work?" Evelyn thought about it. "I didn't. I just knew I had to try." "But weren't you scared?" "Terrified." "So, what made you keep going?" Evelyn smiled. "I didn't have a choice. And eventually I realized that was the only permission I needed." The room went quiet. When the workshop ended, several students asked for her contact information. 2 of them wanted to visit the farm. One wanted to start a buffalo operation in Oregon and needed a consultant. Evelyn flew home exhausted but lighter than she'd felt in months. When she got back to Blackstone County, Noah was waiting at the farmhouse with news. "I'm going to school," he said. Evelyn's heart sank. "Noah? Not to defer? To actually go? In 3 weeks." Evelyn stared at him. "You're sure?" "Yeah, you were right. I need to build something bigger than this farm. But that doesn't mean I'm leaving it behind. It just means I'm learning how to make it better." Evelyn pulled him into a hug, and Noah held on tight. "I'm proud of you," she whispered. "I'm proud of you too, Mom." That night, Evelyn walked out to Robert's grave. She stood in the cool evening air, the fireflies drifting through the grass, the stars scattered across the sky like salt. She told him about the farm, about the contracts, about Noah's future, about the life they'd somehow rebuilt from grief and failure. "I don't know if you'd be proud of what I did," Evelyn said quietly, "but I hope you'd understand why I had to try." The wind moved through the trees. Evelyn stood there a while longer, then walked back to the farmhouse. The buffalo were settling in for the night, their dark shapes moving slowly through the paddock. Sarah's truck was parked near the barn. Lights glowed in the kitchen windows. And standing at the gates of the farm everyone had once begged her to abandon, Evelyn Mercer finally understood something she'd been searching for all along. She didn't need permission to be extraordinary. She never had. The morning Noah left for college, Evelyn woke before dawn and made pancakes she knew neither of them would eat. She stood at the stove, flipping them mechanically, watching them brown, her chest tight, with something she couldn't name. Noah came downstairs with his duffel bag and backpack, his hair still messy from sleep. He looked younger than 17, or maybe older. Evelyn couldn't decide which. "You didn't have to make breakfast," he said. "I know." They sat at the table in silence, pushing food around their plates, the clock on the wall ticking too loudly. Finally, Noah spoke. I'll come back on weekends, when I can. You don't have to. I want to. Evelyn nodded, not trusting her voice. Noah set down his fork. Mom, I'm going to be okay. I know. And you're going to be okay too. Evelyn smiled despite the tightness in her throat. I know that too. They loaded his stuff into the truck and Evelyn drove him to Columbus in silence. The farmland gave way to suburbs, then to the city itself, buildings rising up against the early morning sky. When they reached the campus, Noah grabbed his bags and stood awkwardly on the sidewalk. I'll call you tonight, he said. Okay? And I'll be back for Thanksgiving. Noah, it's September. He laughed nervously. I know. I wanted you to know. Evelyn pulled him into a hug, holding on longer than she should have. When she finally let go, Noah's eyes were red. Go, she said, before I change my mind and drag you back home. He smiled, shouldered his bags, and walked toward the dormitory without looking back. Evelyn sat in the truck for a long time, watching students move across the campus, young and hopeful and terrifyingly unaware of how fast everything could fall apart. Then she drove home to the empty farmhouse. The quiet hit her harder than she expected. For months, the farm had been chaos. Orders to fill, equipment breaking down, people needing answers she didn't have. But now, with Noah gone and the operation running smoothly, Evelyn found herself alone with her thoughts for the first time since Robert died. She didn't like it. Sarah noticed immediately. You're moping. I'm not moping. You've been staring at that fence post for 10 minutes. Evelyn blinked and realized Sarah was right. I was thinking. About what? Nothing important. Sarah crossed her arms. You miss him? Of course I miss him. Then call him. It's been 2 days. He needs space. Sarah shook her head. You're impossible. That night, Evelyn's phone rang. It was Noah. Hey, Mom? Relief flooded through her. Hey, how's it going? Good. Classes are harder than I thought, but good. You eating enough? Noah laughed. Yes. And before you ask, I'm sleeping fine and doing my laundry. I wasn't going to ask that. Yes, you were. Evelyn smiled. Okay, maybe I was. They talked for half an hour about nothing important, his roommates, the campus food, his professors. When they finally hung up, Evelyn felt lighter. The farmhouse was still too quiet, but it was bearable. A week later, a woman named Rachel Voss showed up at the farm, unannounced. She was maybe 35, wearing jeans and a flannel shirt, her hair pulled back in a messy bun. Are you Evelyn Mercer? Yes? Rachel stuck out her hand. I'm Rachel. I run a small dairy operation about 40 miles north. I heard you're teaching people how to work with buffalo. Evelyn shook her hand. I've helped a few people get started. I want to be one of them. You have experience with dairy? 10 years. But I'm drowning in debt and I need to do something different before I lose everything. Evelyn saw herself in Rachel's face, the exhaustion, the desperation, the stubborn refusal to quit. Come inside, Evelyn said. Let's talk. Over coffee, Rachel explained her situation. She'd inherited the dairy farm from her father 3 years ago, but the margins were impossible. She'd tried everything. Organic certification, direct-to-consumer sales, value-added products. Nothing worked. I need something people can't get anywhere else, Rachel said, like what you're doing here. It's not easy, Evelyn warned. Buffalo are harder to work with than cattle. The learning curve is steep, and there's no guarantee it'll work. I don't need a guarantee. I just need a chance. Evelyn studied her. Why buffalo mozzarella? Why not something else? Rachel met her eyes. Because you did it. And if you can make it work, maybe I can too. Evelyn felt something shift in her chest. She thought about Vittorio, about how he'd taken a chance on her when no one else would, about how one person believing in you could change everything. "All right," Evelyn said. "I'll help you." Rachel's face lit up. "Seriously?" "Seriously, but we do this the right way. I'll teach you everything I know, help you set up your operation, connect you with suppliers. In exchange, you commit to maintaining quality standards and working with me on distribution. Deal." They shook hands and Evelyn felt something she hadn't felt in weeks. Purpose. Rachel wasn't the only one. Over the next month, 3 more women showed up at the farm, each of them struggling, each of them looking for a way out of the trap conventional farming had become. Evelyn met with all of them. She shared her supplier contacts, her production methods, her hard-won knowledge about everything from buffalo behavior to cheese chemistry. Sarah watched this happening with a mixture of amusement and concern. "You know you're creating your own competition, right?" "I know. That doesn't bother you?" Evelyn thought about it. "There's enough demand for all of us. And if we work together instead of fighting each other, we're all stronger." That's very idealistic, maybe, but it's also practical. If one of us fails, buyers lose confidence in the whole concept. If we all succeed, we establish buffalo mozzarella as a legitimate American product. Sarah nodded slowly. "Okay, I can see that." "Besides," Evelyn added, "I remember what it felt like to do this alone. I wouldn't wish that on anyone." By October, Evelyn had helped launch 4 new buffalo dairy operations across Ohio. She'd become, almost accidentally, the center of a small network of women farmers, doing something no one had thought possible. The local newspaper ran a story about it, then a regional magazine, then a national food publication. Suddenly, Evelyn wasn't just a widow who'd made good. She was a movement, and she had no idea how to handle it. The pressure started building again, but this time it came from a different direction. A large food corporation based in Chicago contacted Evelyn with an offer. They wanted to buy her entire operation, the farm, the buffalo, the brand, everything. They'd pay enough to set her up for life, allow her to stay on as a consultant, and scale production to a national level. The offer was staggering. Evelyn sat with the paperwork for 3 days, reading it over and over, trying to understand what she'd be giving up. Thomas came by when he heard about it. "You considering this?" "I don't know." He sat down across from her. "It's a lot of money." "I know. Life-changing money. I know that too." Thomas was quiet for a moment. "But you're not sure." Evelyn set down the papers. "If I sell, I lose control. They'll change the process, cut corners, turn this into something it's not. Everything I built will just become another product on a shelf." "But you'd be set for life. Noah would be set for life." "Is that enough?" Thomas leaned back. "That's not a question I can answer for you." "What would Robert have done?" "Robert would have sold in a heartbeat. He always played it safe." "And you? What would you do?" Thomas considered it. "I would have sold too, but I'm not you. You didn't build this to get rich. You built it to prove something, and if you sell now, you'll always wonder if you gave up too soon." Evelyn nodded slowly. "That's what I'm afraid of." "And don't sell. It's not that simple." "Yes, it is," Thomas said. "You either believe in what you're building or you don't. Everything else is just noise." Evelyn called the corporation the next day and declined their offer. The executive on the phone sounded shocked. "Mrs. Mercer, I don't think you understand. This is more money than most people see in a lifetime." "I understand perfectly." "Then why turn it down?" "Because it's not for sale." There was a long pause. "We could increase the offer." The answer would still be no. After she hung up, Evelyn sat in the kitchen, her hands shaking. She'd just walked away from financial security, from the safe choice, from the smart decision. Sarah found her there an hour later. You okay? I just turned down $3 million. Sarah's eyebrows shot up. Seriously? Yeah. Why? Evelyn looked out the window at the buffalo grazing in the paddock. Because I'm not done yet. Sarah smiled. Good. That week, Evelyn received an unexpected letter from Italy. It was from Vittorio's daughter, a woman named Francesca Bellini. She explained that her father had left Evelyn something in his will, a collection of old cheese-making tools that had belonged to his family for generations. My father spoke of you often in his final months, Francesca wrote. He said you reminded him of what it meant to love the craft. He wanted you to have these. The package arrived 2 weeks later. Inside were wooden pedals worn smooth by decades of use, antique thermometers, hand-carved molds, and a leather-bound journal filled with Vittorio's handwritten notes in Italian. Evelyn sat on the kitchen floor surrounded by these artifacts, tears streaming down her face. Vittorio had given her more than knowledge. He'd given her a legacy, and now it was hers to carry forward. In November, Evelyn was invited to speak at a national agriculture conference in Washington, D.C. The organizers wanted her to present on alternative farming models and women-led agricultural innovation. Evelyn had never spoken at a conference before. She'd never even been to Washington. You should go, Sarah said. This is a big deal. I don't know what I'd say. Tell them your story. That's what they want to hear. Evelyn flew to DC on a grey November morning, her stomach in knots. The conference was held in a massive hotel full of agricultural executives, policymakers, and academics who all seemed to know exactly what they were doing. Evelyn felt completely out of place. The morning of her presentation, she stood backstage, her notes shaking in her hands, wondering if she could just walk out and pretend this never happened. Then she thought about Vittorio, about the women she'd helped, about Noah. She stepped onto the stage. The room was packed, maybe 200 people, all of them watching her expectantly. Evelyn cleared her throat. My name is Evelyn Mercer. A year ago, I was a widow with a failing farm and no idea what to do next. Today, I run one of the only water buffalo mozzarella operations in the United States. She told them everything, the grief, the fear, the 6 buffalo that everyone said would destroy her, the cheese that wouldn't hold, the ordinance designed to shut her down. The moment she realized she had to stop waiting for permission, the room was completely silent. When she finished, the applause was thunderous. Afterward, dozens of people approached her, farmers, entrepreneurs, academics, all of them with questions, ideas, proposals. A woman from the USDA asked if Evelyn would be interested in consulting on alternative livestock programs. A food science professor from Cornell wanted to study her production methods. A documentary filmmaker wanted to make a film about her farm. Evelyn felt overwhelmed and exhilarated and terrified all at once. On the flight home, she stared out the window at the clouds and thought about how far she'd come. A year ago, she'd been burying her husband. Now she was changing an industry. December brought the first real snow. The farm transformed into something quiet and still, the buffalo moving slowly through the white paddock, their breath misting in the cold air. Noah came home for winter break looking older, more confident. He'd made the dean's list. He joined an agricultural innovation club. He talked about classes and professors and ideas that made Evelyn's head spin. You're thriving, she said one night over dinner. Noah shrugged. I guess. No guessing, you are. He smiled. It's good, hard, but good. I'm learning a lot. About what? Sustainable agriculture, supply chain management, how to scale operations without losing quality. He paused. Stuff that could help the farm. Evelyn set down her fork. Noah, you don't have to. I know, but I want to. This place is part of me, Mom. It always will be. I'm just figuring out how to make it better. Evelyn felt her throat tighten. Your father would be proud of you. I hope so. But honestly, I care more about making you proud. You already do. They sat in comfortable silence, the farmhouse warm around them, snow falling softly outside the windows. On Christmas Eve, Evelyn hosted a gathering at the farm. She invited Sarah, Thomas, Rachel, and the other women she'd mentored and a handful of neighbors who'd supported her along the way. The farmhouse filled with laughter and conversation. Someone brought a guitar. Someone else brought homemade bread. The buffalo stood near the fence, curious about the noise. Thomas pulled Evelyn aside at one point. This is good, what you've built here. It's not just me. Maybe not, but it started with you. He paused. Robert would be proud, I'm sure of that. Evelyn felt tears prick her eyes. Thank you. I mean it. You did what he couldn't. You took a risk, and it paid off. Later, after everyone had left and Noah had gone to bed, Evelyn walked out to the paddock. The snow had stopped, and the sky was clear. Stars scattered across the darkness like scattered salt. She thought about Robert, about Vittorio, about everyone she'd lost and everyone she'd found. The buffalo shifted in the barn, their soft sounds carrying through the cold air. And standing there in the snow, Evelyn realized something she'd been too busy to notice. She was happy, not perfectly happy, not without grief or fear or uncertainty, but happy enough. And that was more than she'd ever expected. In January, Rachel called with news. Her first batch of buffalo mozzarella had sold out in 2 days. She had orders backed up for weeks. She was hiring help. It's working, Rachel said, her voice thick with emotion. It's actually working. I knew it would. No, you didn't, but you said it anyway. And that made all the difference. After they hung up, Evelyn sat in the quiet kitchen, feeling something shift inside her. She wasn't just running a farm anymore. She was building something bigger, a network, a community, a new way of thinking about what was possible. And it had all started because she'd refused to accept that impossible meant impossible. By February, exactly 1 year after the buffalo first arrived, the farm had transformed completely. The herd had grown to 16 animals, production had quadrupled. Orders came in from restaurants across the country, the cheese won awards. The network of women farmers continued to expand, and Evelyn stood at the center of it all, exhausted and exhilarated, and more alive than she'd felt in years. Sarah found her in the barn one morning, leaning against the fence, watching the buffalo. You ever stop and think about how crazy this is? Sarah asked. Evelyn smiled. Every single day. And I'm glad I was crazy enough to try. Sarah nodded. Me too. They stood together in the cold morning air, two women who'd bet everything on something impossible, and won. That evening, Evelyn received a call from the Culinary Institute in New York. They wanted her to come back, not for a workshop this time, but as a permanent instructor. They were launching a new program on artisanal American cheesemaking, and they wanted Evelyn to lead it. The offer was generous, prestigious, life-changing. Evelyn listened to the whole pitch, thanked them sincerely, and declined. Why? The director asked, clearly surprised. Because my work isn't in a classroom, Evelyn said. It's here, with the buffalo, with the women I'm teaching, with the farm I built from nothing. We could work around your schedule. I appreciate that, but no, this is where I belong. After she hung up, Evelyn sat alone in the kitchen, Lucia's old cheese mold on the table in front of her. She'd come so far from the terrified widow who'd stood in this kitchen a year ago, wondering if she'd made the biggest mistake of her life. She'd built something extraordinary, not because she was special, but because she'd refused to stop trying. And that, Evelyn realized, was the only permission she'd ever needed. Spring came early that year, the snow melting fast, leaving the fields muddy and raw. Evelyn stood at the kitchen window, watching the sunrise turn the sky pink and gold, her coffee growing cold in her hands. The farm had survived its first full year. The business was growing, Noah was thriving at school. By every measure, she should have felt satisfied. Instead, she felt restless. Sarah noticed it first. "You're pacing again." "I'm thinking." "About what?" Evelyn set down her mug. "About what comes next." "Next?" Sarah frowned. "We're barely keeping up with current orders." "I know, but we can't just keep doing the same thing forever. We either grow or we stagnate. Or we stay exactly where we are and be happy about it." Evelyn shook her head. "That's not how this works. The second we stop pushing forward, someone else will. And then all of this becomes irrelevant." Sarah crossed her arms. "You know what your problem is? You don't know how to enjoy what you've built. You're so busy looking ahead that you never see where you actually are." The words stung because they were true. Evelyn had been running for so long, from grief, from failure, from the possibility of losing everything, that she'd forgotten how to stand still. "Maybe you're right," Evelyn admitted. "I know I'm right. Question is, what are you going to do about it?" That afternoon, Rachel showed up at the farm with two other women Evelyn had mentored over the past months, Angela Torres and Melissa Chen. They looked nervous, which immediately put Evelyn on edge. "What's wrong?" Rachel exchanged glances with the others. "Nothing's wrong. We just wanted to talk to you about something." They sat around the kitchen table, and Rachel pulled out a folder. "We've been talking, all of us who've started Buffalo operations because of you, and we think there's an opportunity we're missing." "What kind of opportunity?" Angela spoke up. "Right now, we're all operating independently. We share information, we help each other, but we're still competing for the same buyers. What if we formalized the network, created a cooperative?" Evelyn blinked. "A cooperative? Shared resources, shared distribution, shared branding," Melissa explained. "We maintain our individual farms, but we work together on everything else. Marketing, sales, quality standards. We'd be stronger together than we are separately." Rachel leaned forward. "And we want you to lead it." Evelyn felt her chest tighten. "I don't know anything about running a cooperative." "You know more than any of us. And more importantly, people trust you. You're the reason any of this exists." "That's not true." "Yes, it is," Angela interrupted. "Without you, I'd still be drowning in debt, trying to make conventional dairy work. You showed me there was another way. We all feel the same." Evelyn looked around the table at these three women who'd taken the same terrifying leap she had, who'd bet everything on something impossible because she'd proven it could be done. "Let me think about it," Evelyn said finally. "Fair enough," Rachel said. "But don't think too long. We need to move on this before someone else does." That night, Evelyn called Noah. "How's school?" "Exhausting. I have 2 papers due and a midterm tomorrow." "Then I'll let you go." "No, it's fine. I needed a break anyway. What's up?" Evelyn explained the cooperative proposal. Noah listened without interrupting, the way he always did when something mattered. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. "What's holding you back?" "I don't know if I want to lead something that big. Right now, I control everything that happens on this farm. If I join a cooperative, I'm responsible for other people's success or failure." "You're already responsible for that. You've been teaching people for months." "Teaching is different than leading." "Not really," Noah said. "You just don't like the word leader because it sounds too important. But that's what you are, Mom, whether you want to admit it or not." Evelyn rubbed her face. "When did you get so smart?" "I've always been smart. You're just finally listening." After they hung up, Evelyn sat in the dark farmhouse, thinking about what it meant to lead. She'd never wanted that role. She just wanted to survive. But somehow, survival had turned into something bigger. And maybe that was the point. The next morning, Evelyn called Rachel. "I'm in, let's do this." The cooperative formed quickly. They named it Heartland Buffalo Collective, and within 2 months, they had 8 member farms across Ohio and Pennsylvania. They established quality standards, shared equipment costs, and created a unified marketing strategy that positioned American buffalo mozzarella as a premium artisanal product. Orders exploded. Restaurants that had been buying from individual farms now contracted with the cooperative for consistent supply. Specialty grocers who'd been hesitant to stock a niche product suddenly saw the value in carrying something backed by a professional organization. The growth was exhilarating and terrifying in equal measure. Evelyn found herself traveling constantly, meeting with distributors, speaking at food conferences, consulting with new farmers who wanted to join the collective. The farm that had once demanded every minute of her attention now ran smoothly under Sarah's management, which created a new problem. Evelyn didn't know what her role was anymore. She wasn't just a farmer, but she wasn't quite a business executive either. She was caught somewhere in between, trying to figure out where she belonged. Thomas noticed, "You seem lost." "I'm fine. You're a terrible liar." They were sitting on his porch, drinking coffee, watching the sun set over his property. Thomas had sold most of his cattle last year and converted part of his land to buffalo dairy with Evelyn's help. He was one of the few people who understood what she was going through. "I spent a year fighting to build this farm," Evelyn said, "and now that it's built, I don't know what I'm supposed to do with myself." "You're supposed to enjoy it." "I don't know how." Thomas set down his mug. "You know what your problem is? You think you have to earn the right to be happy. Like if you stop fighting, everything will fall apart." Evelyn didn't respond. "Robert was the same way," Thomas continued, "always waiting for things to get better before he let himself relax, and then he died, and he never got the chance." "That's a cheerful thought." "It's a true thought. You've built something extraordinary, Evelyn. At some point, you have to let yourself actually live in it." In June, the collective received an unexpected offer. A major food distributor wanted to purchase the entire cooperative, all 8 farms, the brand, the infrastructure, everything. The offer was substantial enough that every member would walk away wealthy. The vote happened at a meeting in Rachel's barn. All 8 farm owners gathered around a folding table, the paperwork spread out in front of them. Angela spoke first. "This is generational wealth we're talking about. My kids' kids would be set for life." "But we'd lose control," Melissa countered. "They'd change everything, turn this into just another mass-produced product." "Maybe that's not a bad thing," someone else said. "We could take the money, start something new, do it all over again." Rachel looked at Evelyn. "You haven't said anything." Evelyn had been staring at the paperwork, her mind churning. She thought about Vittorio, about the tools he'd left her, about the legacy he'd trusted her to carry forward. "We're not selling," Evelyn said quietly. The room went silent. "Evelyn," Angela started, "I know it's a lot of money. I know it would change all of our lives, but that's not why we did this." Evelyn looked around the table. "We built this because we wanted to create something that mattered, something we controlled, something that couldn't be bought or replicated or turned into just another product on a shelf. If we sell now, we're saying that money matters more than the work, and I don't believe that." "Easy for you to say," someone muttered. "You've already proven yourself." "No," Evelyn said firmly. "I've proven that this is possible. We all have. And if we sell now, we're telling everyone who comes after us that the only way to win is to cash out. That's not the lesson I want to teach." Rachel nodded slowly. "She's right." "This is insane," Angela said. "We're walking away from Millions of dollars. We're walking away from becoming something we're not, Evelyn replied. There's a difference. The vote was 5-3 in favor of declining the offer. Angela and two others left the cooperative that night. Evelyn watched them go, knowing she'd just cost people life-changing money because of her own principles. Sarah found her standing outside Rachel's barn, staring at the stars. You okay? No? You did the right thing. Did I? 3 families just lost millions because I couldn't let go of some idealistic notion about integrity. They made their choice, Sarah said, just like you made yours. That's how it works. Doesn't make it feel any better. Sarah was quiet for a moment. You know what I think? I think you're scared that if you compromise even once, you'll lose whatever it is that makes this whole thing special. And maybe you're right, but you can't control what other people choose, Evelyn. You can only control what you choose. The cooperative rebuilt. 3 new farms joined to replace the ones that had left. The business continued growing. By August, they'd secured contracts with 2 major restaurant chains and a national specialty grocer. Noah came home for a week before fall semester started. He'd grown again, taller, broader through the shoulders, his face losing the last softness of boyhood. He looked like Robert now, more than Evelyn wanted to admit. They spent the week working together on the farm, falling into the old rhythms they'd built during those early, desperate months. But something was different. Noah moved with confidence now, making decisions without asking permission, suggesting improvements Evelyn hadn't considered. One evening, they sat on the porch watching the buffalo graze. I've been thinking about something, Noah said. What's that? After I graduate, I want to come back here, work with the cooperative, maybe expand into breeding programs, sell buffalo to other farms starting up. Evelyn felt her throat tighten. You don't have to do that. I know, but I want to. This is where I belong. Noah, you could do anything. You could work anywhere. Yeah, but this matters. What you built matters, and I want to be part of it. Evelyn looked at her son, this young man who'd watched her risk everything and had somehow come out of it stronger instead of broken. Okay, she said softly, but on one condition. What? You do it because you want to, not because you think I need you to? Noah smiled. Deal. In September, Evelyn received a letter from Francesca Bellini, Vittorio's daughter. She was planning a trip to the United States and wanted to visit the farm to see what her father had helped create. Francesca arrived on a cool autumn morning, a tall woman in her 50s with her father's sharp eyes and careful hands. She walked through the farm slowly, taking everything in: the buffalo, the cheese-making facility, the field stretching out toward the horizon. In the kitchen, Evelyn made fresh mozzarella while Francesca watched. When she finished, she cut a piece and handed it to Vittorio's daughter. Francesca took a bite, her eyes closed. He was right, she said finally. This is extraordinary. He taught me everything. No, he taught you the technique, but this... Francesca gestured at the cheese, the farm, everything around them. This came from you. My father could see that. It's why he cared so much. They spent the afternoon talking about Vittorio, about Italy, about the weight of carrying forward someone else's legacy. As the sun set, Francesca pulled something from her bag, an old photograph of Vittorio as a young man standing in front of a cheese-making facility in Naples. I want you to have this, Francesca said, as a reminder that what you're doing isn't just business, it's art, and art deserves to be protected. After Francesca left, Evelyn hung the photograph in the kitchen next to Lucia's cheese mold. 2 legacies intertwined, a reminder of where she'd come from and what she was protecting. October brought the first frost. The county fair came around again, and this time Evelyn was invited to judge the dairy competition instead of just participating. She stood in front of a table full of cheese samples, assessing texture and flavor, offering feedback to nervous farmers who'd spent months perfecting their products. One of them was a young woman, maybe 23, with flour on her jeans and hope in her eyes. "What made you try this?" Evelyn asked. "I heard about you," the woman said, "about what you did with the buffalo. I figured if you could make it work, maybe I could try something different too." Evelyn smiled. "What's different about yours?" "Goat cheese infused with lavender from my garden. Everyone said it was too weird, but I think people might like it." Evelyn tasted it. The flavor was delicate, unusual, surprisingly beautiful. "It's excellent," Evelyn said. "Don't let anyone tell you it's too weird. Weird is just another word for brave." The young woman's face lit up, and Evelyn saw herself 5 years earlier, terrified and determined, and desperately hoping someone would tell her she wasn't crazy. Sheriff Briggs approached during the lunch break. "Mrs. Mercer?" "Sheriff." He looked uncomfortable. "I wanted to apologize for how I treated you when you first started. I thought you were making a mistake. You weren't the only one." "No, but I was supposed to support people in this county, and instead I tried to shut you down. That was wrong." Evelyn studied him. "You were doing what you thought was right." "Doesn't make it right." "No, but it makes it human." They stood in awkward silence for a moment, then Briggs nodded and walked away. Later, Evelyn found herself thinking about forgiveness. Not the grand, sweeping kind, but the small daily act of letting go of resentment, of understanding that people made mistakes, including her, of recognizing that holding grudges was just another way of staying stuck in the past. November brought unexpected news. The USDA announced a new grant program for alternative livestock operations, and Heartland Buffalo Collective was awarded a substantial sum to expand educational outreach and support new farmers entering the industry. The money meant they could hire staff, develop training programs, and help even more people transition away from conventional farming. At the collective's meeting, Rachel proposed something radical. What if we use part of this money to buy back the farms that left? Offer Angela and the others a chance to rejoin on better terms? They made their choice, someone argued. People are allowed to change their minds, Rachel said. We all have at some point. Evelyn thought about Angela, about the look on her face when she'd walked away from millions of dollars, about how hard it must have been to choose security over principle, and how much harder it would be to admit she'd regretted it. "I'll reach out to them," Evelyn said. "See if they're interested." Angela was. So were the other two who'd left. By December, the collective was whole again, stronger and more unified than before. Christmas that year felt different. Noah was home for break, helping expand the barn to accommodate the growing herd. Thomas came over for dinner, looking older but lighter somehow, like he'd finally set down a weight he'd been carrying too long. Sarah brought her mother, a tiny woman with sharp eyes, who immediately started reorganizing Evelyn's kitchen. "Your spices are a disaster," she announced. "Mom, leave her alone," Sarah said. "It's fine," Evelyn laughed. "She's right." They gathered around the table, this makeshift family Evelyn had assembled from loss and stubbornness and shared purpose. The food was simple but good. The conversation was easy. The farmhouse felt warm and full. After dinner, Noah pulled Evelyn aside. "I got an offer from a big agricultural consulting firm. They want me to join after graduation." Evelyn's heart sank. "That's amazing." I turned it down. "Noah, I know what I said about coming back here, and I meant it. This is where I want to be." "But that's opportunity. Will always be there," Noah interrupted. This? What we're building? This only happens once, and I want to be part of it while it matters. Evelyn pulled him into a hug, overwhelmed by gratitude and fear and love. You're sure? She whispered. I've never been more sure of anything. New Year's Eve arrived quiet and cold. Evelyn stood alone in the paddock, watching the buffalo huddle together against the winter wind. 2 years since Robert had died. 2 years since she'd bought 6 impossible animals and bet everything on a dream nobody believed in. The farm was thriving, the collective was growing, Noah was coming home, Thomas had forgiven her. The county had stopped looking at her like a crazy widow and started seeing her as someone who'd built something real. By every measure, she'd succeeded, so why did she still feel like she was waiting for something? Sarah appeared beside her, wrapped in a heavy coat. You planning to freeze to death out here? Just thinking. About what? Evelyn was quiet for a long time. About whether any of this was worth it. Sarah looked at her sharply. Were you serious? I don't know. Some days I think I should have just sold the farm, taken the money, let Noah have a normal childhood instead of watching his mother slowly lose her mind over cheese. But you didn't. No. Why not? Evelyn thought about it. Because I needed to prove I could. Not to anyone else, to myself. And did you? I think so, but I'm not sure what I'm supposed to do with that now. Sarah was quiet for the moment. You know what your real problem is? You think success means you stop being scared. But it doesn't. It just means you learned how to keep going anyway. That's not very comforting. It's not supposed to be. It's supposed to be true. They stood together in the cold darkness watching the buffalo breathe. Finally, Sarah spoke again. You changed this whole county, you know. Not because you did something perfect. Because you did something impossible. And that gave other people permission to try their own impossible things. I never meant to do that. I know. That's what makes it matter. January brought a call from a television network. They wanted to do a documentary series about women in agriculture, and they wanted Evelyn's story to be the centerpiece. We'd film over 6 months, the producer explained, follow your daily life, the collective's growth, the impact you've had on the community. It would reach millions of people. Evelyn's first instinct was to say no. She didn't want cameras following her around, turning her life into entertainment. But then she thought about that young woman at the county fair, making lavender goat cheese because Evelyn had shown her it was possible to be brave. She thought about all the women still trapped in failing farms, still waiting for permission to try something different. Okay, Evelyn said, but on one condition, you don't make this about me. You make it about what's possible when people stop waiting for permission. Deal. The film crew arrived in February on the anniversary of the buffalo's arrival. They captured everything: the early morning milk-ins, the cheese-making process, the collective meetings, the quiet moments of doubt Evelyn thought she'd hidden. They interviewed Sarah, Thomas, Noah, Rachel, and dozens of other people whose lives had intersected with Evelyn's. Angela spoke about leaving the collective and coming back. I thought money would make me feel secure, but walking away from what we were building, that made me feel empty. Evelyn gave me a second chance, and I'm never taking it for granted again. Thomas talked about his son. Robert was a good man, but he was afraid to take risks. Evelyn wasn't, and she built something he never could have. I'm proud to be part of it. Noah spoke last. My mom taught me that the only permission you need is your own. Everything else is just noise. When Evelyn watched the rough cut months later, she barely recognized herself. The woman on screen looked strong, confident, certain. Nothing like how Evelyn felt inside. Is that really what people see? She asked the director. That's what you are, the director replied. You just don't see it yet. The documentary aired in late spring. The response was overwhelming. The network's website crashed from traffic. Social media exploded with stories of people inspired to start their own businesses, take their own risks, stop waiting for permission. Evelyn's phone rang constantly. Interview requests, speaking invitations, offers she couldn't possibly accept. But the call that mattered most came from a woman in Montana. My name is Jennifer Park, she said. I'm a widow with a failing ranch, and I just watched your story. I think I want to try buffalo. Evelyn smiled. Tell me about your operation. They talked for 2 hours. By the end, Evelyn had connected Jennifer with suppliers, sent her Vittorio's notes, and promised to visit Montana to help her get started. After she hung up, Evelyn sat in the quiet kitchen, Lucia's cheese mold on the table in front of her. This was the work. Not the success, not the recognition, not the money or the awards or the documentary. The work was this. One person helping another person believe that impossible things were possible. Everything else was just decoration. By summer, the collective had grown to 23 farms across 8 states. They trained over 100 new farmers. The documentary had been nominated for an Emmy. Major culinary schools were adding buffalo mozzarella to their curriculum. And Evelyn stood in the middle of it all, still not quite believing it was real. Noah graduated in May and came home permanently. He immediately started developing breeding programs and consulting with new farms. Within months, he'd become as essential to the collective as Evelyn. One evening, they sat together on the porch, watching the sun set over the expanded herd. You think Dad would be proud? Noah asked. Evelyn thought about Robert, kind, cautious, always playing it safe. I think he'd be terrified, but yeah, I think he'd be proud. You miss him? Every day? But not the way I used to. Now it's just part of who I am. The grief doesn't go away. You just learn to carry it better. Noah nodded. I'm glad I came back. Me too. They sat in comfortable silence, the farm settling into evening around them. In October, Evelyn made a pilgrimage she'd been putting off for 2 years. She drove to the cemetery and stood at Robert's grave with Lucia's old wooden cheese mold in her hands. I did it, she said quietly. The thing everyone said was impossible. I actually did it. The wind moved through the trees, carrying the scent of autumn leaves and distant wood smoke. I used to come here and tell you everything, Evelyn continued. All the problems, all the fears. Like somehow you could still help me figure it out, but I don't need that anymore. I figured it out myself. She set the cheese mold on the headstone, then picked it back up. I'm keeping this, she said, because it's not about you anymore, it's about me, about Lucia, about everyone who came before and everyone who comes after. It's about the work. She stood there a while longer, saying goodbye to the need for approval, for validation, for permission from anyone, living or dead. Then she walked back to her truck and drove home. The farm transformed through late autumn, new equipment arrived, the herd expanded to 30 buffalo. The cheese-making facility doubled in size. The collective opened a training center where new farmers could learn the craft before starting their own operations. And through it all, Evelyn moved with a quieter confidence than before. Not because she'd stopped being scared, but because she'd finally accepted that fear was just part of the process. In November, on the eve of Thanksgiving, the collective held its annual gathering. All 23 farms sent representatives. They shared food, stories, and gratitude for what they'd built together. Rachel stood up to speak. 3 years ago, I was drowning. My farm was failing. My marriage was falling apart. I was one bad season away from losing everything. Then I heard about this crazy widow in Blackstone County who'd bought buffalo and started making cheese nobody thought would sell. The room laughed. I drove down here expecting to meet someone who had all the answers, Rachel continued. Instead, I met someone who was just as scared as I was. But she was doing it anyway. And that changed everything. She raised her glass. To Evelyn Mercer, who taught us that the only permission we need is our own. To Evelyn, the room echoed. Evelyn stood up, overwhelmed. I didn't do this alone. Every single person in this room took the same risk I did, and that's what makes this work. Not one person's courage, but all of us deciding that impossible things are worth trying. She looked around at these farmers who'd become friends, partners, family. So thank you for believing, for trying, for refusing to give up when it got hard. The applause was thunderous. That night, after everyone had left, Evelyn walked out to the paddock one last time. The buffalo were settled for the night, their massive shapes barely visible in the darkness. Sarah appeared beside her. You okay? Yeah, I think I finally am. Took you long enough. Evelyn smiled. I'm a slow learner. You're a stubborn learner. There's a difference. They stood together in the cold night air, two women who'd built something impossible from nothing but determination and refusal to quit. You know what I realized? Evelyn said. This was never about the cheese, or the farm, or proving everyone wrong. What was it about? It was about learning that I didn't need anyone's permission to become who I was supposed to be. I just needed to decide I was worth the risk. Sarah nodded. And are you? Worth it? Evelyn thought about everything she'd lost and everything she'd found, about the grief that had driven her and the hope that had sustained her, about the impossible thing she'd built and the people she'd helped along the way. Yeah, she said finally. I think I am. December arrived cold and clear. Noah was in the barn, working with a new farmer who'd come all the way from Oregon to learn the system. Thomas stopped by most mornings now, helping where he could, content to be part of something that was growing instead of dying. The collective was planning its expansion into international markets. The documentary had won its Emmy. 3 more culinary schools had added buffalo mozzarella programs. And Evelyn stood in her kitchen making cheese the way Vittorio had taught her, the way Lucia had done it generations before. Her hands moved through the familiar motions, heating, forming, stretching. The curds transformed under her touch, becoming something beautiful and rare and entirely her own. When she finished, she held up a perfect ball of mozzarella, glossy and smooth, and thought about how far she'd come, from a widow with nothing to lose, to a woman who'd built an empire from grief and stubbornness and 6 impossible animals. She thought about all the women who'd come to her farm, looking for answers and left with permission to write their own. She thought about Vittorio, who'd believed in her when she couldn't believe in herself. She thought about Robert, who she'd loved but who'd never quite dared to dream this big. And she thought about Noah, who'd watched his mother risk everything and had learned that sometimes the scariest thing you can do is exactly the thing you need to do most. The cheese sat cooling on the counter, perfect and complete. Evelyn washed her hands and looked out the window at the farm, at the buffalo grazing in the winter fields, at the barn full of equipment that had seemed impossible to afford 2 years ago, at the life she'd built from absolute nothing. Some people spent their entire lives waiting for permission to become extraordinary. Evelyn Mercer never did. She just decided she was worth the risk. And in the end, that decision had changed everything. Not just for her, but for every person who'd watched her refuse to quit and had thought, even for a moment, that maybe they didn't need permission either. Maybe they just needed to start, and the rest would follow. Spring came again, and with it, new beginnings. The collective announced plans to open a retail storefront in Columbus. Noah had started dating someone from his agricultural program. Thomas had finally sold the last of his land and moved into a small house in town, content to spend his remaining years watching what his family had built instead of struggling to maintain what they'd lost. Sarah hired an assistant, a young woman from town who'd been working dead-end retail jobs and was desperate for something that mattered. And Evelyn accepted an invitation to speak at the graduation ceremony for the Culinary Institute in New York, not as an instructor this time, but as the keynote speaker. She stood in front of 200 graduating students, looking out at young faces full of hope and fear and uncertainty, and she told them the truth. "I didn't succeed because I was special," Evelyn said. "I succeeded because I was desperate. And in that desperation, I found something more valuable than talent or education or connections. I found a willingness to fail." She paused, letting the words sink in. Most people never try the impossible thing because they're afraid of failing. But failure isn't the worst thing that can happen. The worst thing is spending your whole life wondering what would have happened if you'd just been brave enough to try. The room was silent. So my advice to you is this: stop waiting for permission. Stop waiting until you're ready. Stop waiting until it's safe. 'Cause it will never feel safe. It will never feel like the right time. You just have to decide you're worth the risk. She looked out at the audience and saw herself 3 years earlier, terrified and grieving and convinced she was about to destroy everything. "I bought 6 water buffalo with money I didn't have," Evelyn said. "Everyone thought I was insane, and maybe I was, but I also knew that if I didn't try, I'd spend the rest of my life wondering if I could have. And that was scarier than any failure." The applause was deafening. Afterward, dozens of students approached her with questions, ideas, dreams they were afraid to speak out loud. Evelyn listened to every single one, 'cause she remembered what it felt like to have an impossible dream and no one who believed it could work. And she'd promised herself that if she ever succeeded, she'd be that person for someone else. On a warm evening in late May, Evelyn sat on her porch with a glass of wine, watching the buffalo move through the golden light of sunset. The farm was quiet. Noah was in town with his girlfriend. Sarah had gone home hours ago. Thomas was probably asleep in his chair, the newspaper open on his lap. For the first time in 3 years, Evelyn had nothing urgent to do. No orders to fill, no crises to manage, no impossible thing demanding her immediate attention, just this moment. Just the farm she'd built, just the life she'd claimed for herself. Her phone buzzed with a text from Noah. "Bringing someone by tomorrow. Want you to meet her." Evelyn smiled and typed back, "Looking forward to it." She set down the phone and looked out at the farm, at everything she'd built, from loss and desperation and stubborn refusal to accept that impossible meant impossible. Somewhere in the distance, one of the buffalo called out and another answered. The sound carried across the fields, ancient and steady and completely unafraid. Evelyn took a sip of wine and thought about Vittorio's last words to her. People succeed not because life becomes easier, but because they refuse to stop believing before the world finally catches up. The world had caught up. And Evelyn Mercer was still here. Not perfect, not fearless, not without scars, but here, building, creating, becoming. And that, she finally understood, was enough.